Welcome back to the latest in our series of mind-setting videos with Steve Backley and Roger Black. This week, we're going to be talking about challenging convention. And, we deal with a lot of industries at A4G, and what I sort of notice is that most of those industries, people will just sort of follow what everybody else in that industry is doing and not get ideas from perhaps outside their industry. So, how do you recognise when you're not challenging convention and perhaps you should be?
Yeah, I'll pick up there, Mark, if I may. I suppose being in a technical event with historic styles and ways of doing things, there were kind of assumptions and expectations. You go down a certain route of, we're talking about the process of getting the job done, right? That's kind of we're getting into the nitty gritty of how we go about doing things when we talk about, the conversations when you might challenge something with a process and somebody's, well, we've always done it that way. Well, it works, don't change it. And we're not talking about, just changing stuff for the sake of it. But I suppose it's how process and how things evolve in every context. They evolve out of trying to do something a little bit different. And I mentioned the technical aspect of being a javelin thrower. It's how I got to be successful. I was nowhere near as physically as effective as most of the people I was up against. In fact, the vast majority of them were way more physically capable than I ever was. But I know that one strength I had was that I was constantly looking for an edge, for something, for a way. And I've without going into the detail of it, I found a way of creating force into a javelin so that it jumped out of my hand at 70 miles an hour consistently. And it was to do with how I used my shoulder, my chest and so on. But it was out of a need to go, well, hold on, how can I make this work better? And I think if we just keep asking that question, how can I make this work better? Not because we've always done it that way. How can this be improved? Because if the world's changing, if we're not adapting and changing our process, we're going to stand still, right? At best, possibly even go backwards.
Yeah, I think Steve's right there. And I think that growth mindset, recognizing that, I love the saying in sport, if you think you found a winning formula, you're about to get beaten. And it's true, and it basically means there's no room for complacency. Very quickly, I was very fortunate that I was part of a relay team that challenged convention at the World Championships back in 1991. And by challenging convention, we became world champions. And we didn't just change, our lives, we changed the event. We did something that at the time was so dramatic of people looking in, but now it's just taken as normal. We changed the running order for the relay team. And, I haven't got time to talk about that in detail, but convention in relay running was you put your best athlete last, you put an okay athlete first, and then basically you just chuck the other two in the middle. And that's what every team did. It was what you did. And as the fastest runner, you always ran last. That was your divine right. And in the World Championships in Tokyo, that was me in our team. But we realized that by challenging convention, by changing the running order, by changing the way the race was going to be run, because we could be in the lead as soon as the gun went, by putting me on the first lap, and then almost going in reverse, putting our second fastest runner second, a guy called Derek Redmond, and then John Regis, and then Chris Akabusi running last. What we did was we didn't just change how we performed, we also changed how the rest of the world performed. We became world champions that day by doing a very simple thing, because it wasn't a lot. We just took somebody from there and put him there. That's all we did. But what we actually did was we did challenge convention. And now when you watch relays on television, you'll often see the teams playing around. There's no fixed running order. And that didn't happen in those days. And I think we have to apply that to our business lives and personal lives. And as Steve said, it's not changing just for the sake of changing. It's changing to improve. And if we're comfortable, that's fine, as long as comfortable is enough. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you feel you want to achieve more, whether it's in sport or in business, challenging convention is something that you will have to do, or you might get left behind.
Do you know what, Malc? I think I was sort of smiling as Roger's saying that. I think it's something that is consistent in certainly the people around us as high achievers in sport. I'm thinking, Roger, you trained with Daley Thompson. I'm thinking people like Linford Christie. I'm thinking, Sally Gunnell, Jonathan Edwards, the people we're very fortunate to spend time with. And there's one thing that's consistent. They all kind of back themselves enough to kind of do it their own way.
Yeah.
And have that inner steely confidence to say, I'm gonna trust my instincts here to do it a way that seems right. And actually that becomes the new norm. As your wonderful anecdote from the relay, people challenge convention and then it becomes convention, and it's quite a fast moving thing in sport, in fact, isn't it? When as traditions evolve, and things become new normals.
And there's so many great examples in sport of that. But I think probably the best example, arguably the most famous example, was when an American athlete called Dick Fosbury, at whatever Olympics was, I don't know, Steve, was it 68, 64? Yeah. Up until that moment, everyone jumped over in the high jump. They did a scissor high jump or something like that, or straddle. And he is the first person to jump over backwards. And everyone jumps over backwards now, and they have done since that day. But at the time, it was like, what's this guy doing? Now we take it for granted. But at some point, someone has to take that step to challenge convention. And if they get it right, the rest of the herd will follow.
That's interesting. Just a secondary question, Dave. Do you think people get frightened of challenging convention just because they're frightened that it won't work and that they'll look foolish, and that they just need to be a bit braver?
I think it's a really good point, Malcolm. And I think if you think back to the people that I mentioned, the sports people, and maybe there's people in industry who are, the champions who have the same trait, and they wouldn't be scared of failing. I think it's one of the kind of traits or certainly behaviours of a successful sports person is you can't be scared of failing, because you have to fail to succeed. Of course you do, because you have to know where your boundaries are, and not everything you try is going to work, but we have to keep trying. We have to keep pushing boundaries and have that sort of insatiable kind of hunger and desire to push things forward and not just settle. As Roger said, it is okay sometimes, because it can get a little bit intense if you're just pushing all the time. But at the same time, if looking for change, and it can be small things as well, accumulation of small changes add up to a big change. So there are times to apply that, and then absolutely, there's times to just let it be.
And what I would add to that, just to finish, Malcolm, is that maybe that's what leadership is about with people, is to create an environment in which people are allowed to challenge convention, are allowed to get it wrong sometimes. But that's really easy to say and hard to do, to create an environment where people feel that they can push the boundaries, they can challenge convention, and know that they won't be penalized if it doesn't work, because you learn something from it.
That's great advice, Roger. Thank you for that, guys. We'll see you both next week for the next instalment.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.